Welcome back. So we are continuing with the end of summer review sprint. I have a few sets that are on short-term loan that need to get back to their proper owner. So the next one up is Audio Hekili. But before we jump into that, I do want to touch on something that I actually started talking about yesterday with Tony's set. So this, of course, is the Acros Erasmus, and this is a hybrid, so it's a 1DD, 2BA. And we were talking about coherence for quite a while, perhaps too long. But I said that Tony did a really super job at coherence, at really merging the dynamic driver and the balanced armature. So it literally sounds like one driver. There's not really any shift between the dynamic driver and the balanced armatures. And that's a style that sort of tends to make a hybrid sound maybe more like a single driver, maybe a single dynamic driver. And that's certainly one style of tuning, and Tony obviously prefers that, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And what I talked about with the second style was, well, if you could allow a slight trade-off between coherence and bringing the balanced armatures, a little more separation, that sort of moves you beyond sounding like a dynamic driver into something that sounds beyond what a dynamic driver can do. And that's essentially what I would say that Hekili actually does very well. It sort of trades coherence between the one dynamic driver and the 7 BAs, lets them run a little wild, and you end up with something that's kind of a wow effect of, hearing 7 BAs running full blast. And that's not what Tony did. Tony did something that's very smoothed over and refined and mature. And this is sort of like your teenager, blasting through the neighborhood in a muscle car. It's sort of big and loud and a little less refined, but tons and tons of fun. And I think that's exactly what Hekili is. So for those of you who may have had Lokahi, and by the way, I'm going to butcher all of these names because I don't really know how to properly say them. I think Lokahi is actually Lokahi. Hekili, I have no idea how to actually pronounce it, but it's a very similar shell. It actually has a different faceplate. The cable is actually the same, and it has these sort of ink-stained MMCX connectors, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but they apparently used them again for this set. But the rest of it looks very, very similar to Lokahi. I think it's the exact same shell, same maker, same style. Nozzle kind of poking through in a little do-it-yourself looking version of a shell. So, not too much new there, especially for those of you who may have Lokahi. And I would say the same thing on the graph. The two are actually a little similar, and you can sort of see that Lokahi is the blue, so the sub bass is actually a little lower than it is on Hekili because Hekili replaced the one balanced armature bass on Lokahi with a actual dynamic driver. So you do get a little punch of fun right there in the sub bass on Hekili, but the rest of it is pretty much dead on what you got in Lokahi. And I think that was the gist of why I thought I really, really, really wanted this set. When I had actually heard Lokahi for the first time after I received it, I'm like, I bet you the hybrid version of this is pretty amazing. And so to get to hear it, I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm not all that convinced that it was enough of a difference or an upgrade for me personally. I think people who skipped Lokahi and just picked up Hekili, you guys probably got the winning solution there. But for me, because I bought Lokahi at a discount, and it was a really great value. And I think what I really bought it for were the 7 BAs and not so much the bass. So for me, maybe not as much of an upgrade as it is for other people, but, certainly both sets are very similar in their graphs and tuning. So let's kind of jump into it, and we'll kind of try to get through this a little quicker. So, as I said, not all that far from Lokahi in tuning, but it definitely satisfies the anti-BA crowd, those of you guys who weren't a fan of Lokahi's BA bass. And for me, as I said, I didn't necessarily buy that set for its bass, so it didn't really bother me all that much, and I think the added sub bass in Hekili doesn't really do a whole lot for me. When I first tried the set for the first time, especially after trying Tony's set and that refined neutral style bass, I think the bass was a little overwhelming for me because I had it turned up a lot. So I don't know, it didn't really kind of blow me away. Probably because I have Lokahi. If I didn't have Lokahi, I think this would be a different impression. But since I have it, I didn't necessarily feel that the added sub bass did a whole lot for me. And as I said, my Lokahi was sort of a great value, and I bought it really more for the mids and the treble than the bass. So I'm sort of okay with not owning Hekili at this point. And I do think the mid bass probably could have used a slight ramp to balance that treble energy and really smooth out the transition. And I think both sets do the same thing. Is this? It actually looks pretty good on the graph. There's a nice little bulge here, and that should sort of convey, a little bit of mid bass right into your mids, and maybe it drops down a little bit early here. But this whole level of treble from the upper mids all the way through sort of cuts through anything that you get here. So no matter how nice this bass shelf looks, it sort of gets contrasted with what happens here. So this looks a little bigger than it sounds, and this is perhaps the level is a little brighter than as it appears, but you tend to hear this more than this. So I probably would have added just a little bit here, and I think that would have balanced out with what's here. Just my personal thing. If you're going to go through and release a new set, might as well make it a little different. Sound-wise, like if you just saw it on the graph, it's kind of a big U shape for me. It kind of comes down pretty hard on the mid bass and into your mids. There's not a whole lot of bleed there. There's not a whole lot of warmth. It doesn't lend a whole lot of body to the vocals, but it's not bad. I think it's more of a U shape, but it really kind of carries through a lot of Lokahi's upper mids and treble intensity, and those tend to shine through more than what happens in the low end. And I wouldn't even call it peaky bright. It's just elevated. You get a level of extension and level, I think, tend to be a little more than what I prefer, but I think it's a whole lot of the same of what we had on Lokahi, so I don't really have any complaints there on that. So the bass, as I said, there's sort of moments of where the bass sounds like it looks on the graph, and it's more of a track thing. And as I said, the first time I started playing with it, I was sort of blown away about how much bass there was and how hard it hit. And then as I kept on listening to it, and as tracks had more of a balance of bass and mids and treble, I think it sort of falls into place, and it's not really as big as it looks on the graph. But there's definitely some tracks where I thought the bass was a bit fatiguing, and it looked just as it does on the graph. So as I said, but the upper mids and treble sort of contrast with that, and it never really sounds as big as it looks. Generally not as big. And I definitely ended up turning this one down quite a bit just because of the treble level. And I think at lower volume, the two tend to be a little more balanced than they are at higher volumes. Less of a boom on the bass and less of a fatiguing treble. I think as you turn the volume down, both of them kind of fall into the sweet spot. We're kind of in the pocket of where they should be, and that was kind of better. So the mids, and this will sort of go back to where we started, and I think mids are sort of the guilty pleasure for some people. Some people are really into coherence, and some people really don't really mind multi-BA sets that occasionally like to show off their BAs at the expense of coherency. And I think this is one of those sets that really sort of lets their BAs run a little hotter, at a level that where you really know that there's 7 BAs in there, and there's no real mistaking it, because the dynamic driver tends to drop off and cut off pretty early, and the rest of this and all this extension is full on BAs. And if you're not really a fan of BA timbre, I think this one does sort of lean into that, and that comes along with this sort of a little less coherency than what you might be used to at sets at this price. But for me, I think sets that tend to show off or sound in ways that more, I think I probably have it here, so more edgy, kind of sharp and edgy, more details, more resolution, more upper mid energy and speed, all those things that you traditionally look for in balanced armatures. Sets that'll sort of highlight those areas, perhaps at the expense of fitting in well with the dynamic driver. They are attractive to me, and I think this one definitely falls in that category of, it doesn't sound like too many other sets I have. It's it's kind of full blast BAs, and I actually didn't mind all BAs. The dynamic driver just didn't really add a whole lot for me because I really like that BA sound here. And I will acknowledge that not everyone is going to appreciate it, and it's probably a bit intense for some people, but, you know, I think at Lokahi's price that I got it for, it was sort of a bargain. Full Hekili price, you know, I'm not as excited about that. And I think if I was actually going to set about doing a next set on Lokahi, I would have probably added a little more refinement to those mids and treble and just, you know, soften them up a little bit, you know, so they're not really as raw as they are. But, you know, I think buying a set for that characteristic, not a problem, and sort of one of my guilty pleasures anyway. So treble-wise, I don't actually think it changed a whole lot from Lokahi. And as I said, I didn't spend tons and tons of time with this one, but, you know, again, it's just not going to be everyone's cup of tea, especially how it matches against the bass and the treble, how they're sort of separated and distinct, and there's not a whole lot of transition to the two through the mids. So it's energetic and engaging and definitely extended like Lokahi, but I'm definitely one of those people that's a little more partial to a relaxed treble level. So this one's a bit higher than I prefer. And if you have it turned up in high volume, it's quite intense. So again, turning it down definitely worked better for me. Stage-wise, again, very similar to Lokahi. Not too much depth. It kind of sounds too close occasionally. It gets really right there up in your face. And Lokahi did about the same exact thing. So again, less volume works better. On certain tracks, you actually do get a little more sense of depth. I think something about this one, and maybe it's a dynamic driver or the new tuning or different drivers, there was a little bit extra in the stage that I think worked a little better for me than it did on Lokahi, but very, very much track dependent. Some tracks are just going to be flat there right in your face. Other ones, maybe softer tracks, less areas, are sort of going to be a little more better on stage. But yeah, I think generally not a whole lot different than what Lokahi was. So that's it. That's kind of a quick overview of Hekili, one of those sets that I had tried to think about buying more than a few times, mainly because the proper owner of this set, talks about it all the time and really loves it, was also a Lokahi owner as well. So kind of always on my mental note to look at it during Linsol sales, but I never really bought it. And now that I heard it, I'm probably okay with sticking with their first set without the dynamic driver. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.